Well, the question is, he wants to know if you have any evidence to prove that just because he's physically in Canada, that your Constitution and laws apply to him.
Yes, the Canadian Constitution is law within Canada. If this is a detax or tax protester kind of submission that's being made, then I can certainly advise that, yes, it is the minister's position that Canadian laws apply to people within Canada.
We understand that. The question is, do you have any actual proof, any relevant facts that will prove that just because he's physically in Canada, the laws apply to him?
I don't understand what you're saying.
Well, I'm just taking your claim that you believe that the laws apply to him. I'm asking you if you have any proof of that. So just because he's physically in Canada, you say the laws apply to him. I'm asking if you have any proof to back up that claim.
Well, there are certainly decisions from the courts that have stated that, indeed, the laws of Canada, and in particular the Income Tax Act, are constitutional.
I understand. That's just a legal opinion. I'm asking you if there's any actual evidence to back up the claim that just because he's physically in Canada, that the Constitution and laws apply to him.
Look, the courts have ruled that, again, the Constitution of Canada and the Income Tax Act are constitutional. That's really all I'm going to say on the matter. If Mr. has any further inquiries on that point, I would encourage him to send me something in writing. Okay,
that could be done. However, you seem to be confusing an issue of fact with an issue of law. The courts make rulings on issues of fact that are fact-specific to that particular case. It's got no application to this particular one. And whether it's constitutional or not is not the issue. That's an issue of law. We're asking an issue of fact. Is there any evidence to show that the Constitution applies just because he's physically in Canada?
I'm sorry. As a lawyer, that question doesn't really make any sense to me. As I said, if Mr. has any inquiries along this line of detax or tax protester or sovereign citizen thinking, I would encourage him to send me something in writing, and I will send some correspondence back in writing. I think that's the best way to make sure that any communications on this point are clear.
Well, and that will be done. But you actually don't understand when I'm asking for facts to back up your claim that the Constitution applies to him just because he's physically in Canada? That question makes no sense to you?
No, legally that question makes no sense to me.
What about in just plain English, in everyday modern English, does the question make sense to you?
Look, I'm sorry, I don't like the tone that you're taking, and as I've stated with you, I'd prefer to continue this discussion in writing. If you send something in writing to my office, then we will respond in writing in kind.
Well, my tone is still professional. I'm just trying to clarify what you're saying. It just seems to be that you're trying to dodge the question by putting a legal spin on it, that the question doesn't make legal sense.
It's not dodging the question to indicate to you that I am prepared to answer your questions in writing, but not on the phone today.
Well, in my experience, almost 100% of the time an attorney tells me to put the question in writing, they're not going to be responsive. Even if you give me your word you're going to be, and you promise you're not going to use a court citation to settle an issue of fact. And I can tell you right off the bat, this is not a sovereign citizen thing, and Meads versus Meads is completely inapplicable because those dealt with issues of law, and I haven't raised an issue of law with you. I'm only raising an issue of fact.
By speaking about the application of the Constitution, that absolutely is an issue of law. The Constitution is a law. I mean, that's the way in which I don't understand how you're framing this. So, again, I will reiterate, please send your inquiries in writing. I am not prepared to speak to this at this time.
So at this time, you wouldn't be prepared or qualified to present any evidence or relevant facts proving your Constitution applies to him just because he's physically in Canada?
On a cold call, on a file that I haven't reviewed, no, I'm not prepared to speak to this specific file at this time.
Okay, so if he puts it in writing, you are giving your word to be responsive, that you will not respond to an issue of fact or a question of fact with legal citations. You'll actually address and present facts, not legal conclusions or legal citations.
No, I'm saying no such thing. I'm saying if he sends a question in writing, I will respond in writing. I'm not fettering the minister as to how the minister will respond to any question he poses. All I can do is give the answer that is my client's position and that we believe to be correct.
That you believe to be correct and responsive to the question?
I can respond to questions.
Can you be responsive to a question of fact that is raised?
I told you my position on this, and so you can send your questions in writing if you so choose. That's all I'm willing to say on the matter.
So you're being artfully vague about it, which I get is typical of the legal profession, to not give a solid yes or no so that you can be held accountable for that later. But it seems to me that good faith dictates that if you're asking for it to be in writing, for us to go through the trouble to do that, you should be willing to agree that you will be responsive to the question.
I will agree to respond to the question. If the question is a question that I don't feel is legitimate, then I will indicate in that in my response. I'm not going to give you some kind of promise as to the quality of my answer, because that will almost certainly be used against me. And considering, again, the adversarial tone you've taken in this conversation about the nature of the legal profession and the activities of lawyers, I would prefer that all further communications on this file be conducted in writing so that there is no misunderstanding between the parties or, accusations down the line concerning any miscommunications.
Well, Ms. I've only responded to how you're responding to me. You don't want to answer that you will be responsive to a question. Now imagine if you flip that around and you're questioning me, and I tell you I will respond to your question, and you continually ask me, will you be responsive to the question, and I won't answer. I mean, wouldn't that raise a red flag to you? Would that seem honest and upfront and acting in good faith to you?
I've provided my position, sir.
But you're being
Please send in your written answers or your questions. Thank you. Bye-bye.
You don't need to... And hang up. She would not say yes or no that she would be responsive if you put it in writing.
Yeah.
Oh, my